The CEO boss stood between them and said, "You'll never touch her again." Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The sterile, gray marble of the Varen Global Holdings lobby felt less like an entrance to a trillion-dollar empire and more like the interior of a gilded cage. And Alara Vance felt the phantom weight of chains on her own wrists every time the heavy glass doors hissed open. It had been 7 months since she had fled her former life, since she had shed the name and reputation tied to her husband, Marcus Thorne, a man whose smile could charm a nation while his fist could shatter bone. Now, using the name Lena Evans, she was a low-level analyst in the mergers and acquisitions department, an invisible cog in an enormous machine, and that invisibility was her most prized possession. She needed to earn a living, and in her industry, the finance world was so vast and impersonal that it was the perfect place to hide. Her degrees in art history and curatorial management were useless now. She had traded Vermeer for valuations and brushes for balance sheets, a disguise she prayed was foolproof. The problem with being a temporary ghost, however, was that eventually you had to materialize to conduct business, and that was precisely what led her to the Varen Global Penthouse conference room on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. She was there to present a preliminary acquisition report for a small, distressed assets firm, a mere formality until the senior partners took over. But the moment she stepped into the room, she knew something was deeply wrong. Instead of the 3 expected junior executives, she was greeted by the imposing, slick figure of Philip Sterling, a rival finance heavyweight notorious for his hostile takeovers, and more critically, for his old, intimate friendship with Marcus. Alara's blood turned to ice. Sterling was a direct line to her past, a harbinger of the doom she had spent every waking moment trying to outrun. Sterling's eyes, cold and assessing, swept over her, pausing briefly on the gold band she still wore, a necessary deception to ward off unwanted attention, but his focus was the portfolio she held. "Lena Evans, is it?" His voice was a low, oily rumble. "Varen has you handling this small-time operation. They must be short-staffed." He leaned back in the plush leather chair, radiating an immediate sense of dominance. "Forget the presentation. I know Varen is planning to acquire this firm to wash some. Well, let's call them non-traditional assets. My offer is simpler. Give me your preliminary data, and I'll ensure you get a tidy bonus. A substantial one, enough to start fresh somewhere very far away. If you refuse, I can promise you that your career, and perhaps your current living arrangement, will become exceedingly uncomfortable." The threat was clear. The implication of Marcus's reach was heavy in the air. Sterling knew nothing about her true identity, but he didn't have to. He just had to be the kind of man who enjoyed ruining a woman's life to gain an advantage. Fear, sharp and paralyzing, wrapped around Alara's throat. She couldn't run again. She was almost out of resources. She couldn't comply, because giving Sterling the data would compromise Varen Global, and Julian Varen, the CEO, was a man whose fury was rumored to be less a corporate event and more a natural disaster. She was trapped between the brute force of her past and the silent, terrifying power of the organization she was now inside. As Sterling slowly pushed a non-disclosure agreement and a fat check across the enormous glass table, his expression hardening into an impatient sneer, the door at the far end of the conference room opened without a knock. The entire atmosphere of the room shifted, the temperature dropping, the very air seeming to tighten. Julian Varen entered. He wasn't announced. He simply arrived, a figure of such focused, predatory energy that Sterling's casual arrogance instantly evaporated into nervous deference. Julian Varen was a man sculpted from cold efficiency and dark ambition. His tailored suit was a second skin, accentuating a lean, powerful build, and his eyes, a startling shade of deep-set gray, moved with an assessing intensity that missed nothing. He was young for a man running an organization of Varen Global's magnitude, easily the most ruthless CEO in the city, but the stories that circulated about his family lineage hinted at why. His authority wasn't just corporate. It was ancestral, whispered to involve things that didn't belong on a spreadsheet. He stopped just inside the room, his gaze settling first on Sterling, a flicker of disdain crossing his face, and then on Alara. He didn't speak immediately, but the silence he commanded was absolute. Alara felt those steel-gray eyes pierce through her professional facade, through her fake name, through the 7 months of careful anonymity, down to the trembling core of the desperate woman hiding underneath. She knew, with a certainty that shook her, that he was weighing her worth, her danger, and her utility. Sterling scrambled to his feet, trying to recover his composure. "Julian, my apologies. I didn't know you would be joining us. Just having a friendly chat with your analyst here about the potential acquisition." Julian lifted a single hand, a small gesture that cut Sterling off mid-sentence, enforcing the immediate cessation of his voice. He walked slowly toward the table, never taking his eyes off Alara. The air crackled with a tension that was almost physical. Alara realized this was not just a CEO. This was a man who was used to life-and-death stakes, and she was currently in the crosshairs of his inquiry. Her mind raced, a frantic animal looking for the one impossible exit. She had to give him a reason, a compelling, undeniable, personal reason to intervene on her behalf, something that would explain why she was caught up with Sterling and why she looked like a deer cornered in the headlights. A desperate, reckless lie formed on her tongue, an impulsive act of self-preservation that was as dangerous as the men who threatened her. Julian finally reached the table, and his eyes, cold and utterly devoid of warmth, met hers. He was waiting. Taking a deep, shaky breath, Alara forced her chin up, channeling all the panic and desperation into a mask of righteous indignation that she had perfected during her years with Marcus. She picked up the signed non-disclosure agreement Sterling had just presented, crumpled it into a tight ball, and threw it back at him across the table. Her voice, miraculously, came out steady, even ringing with a manufactured confidence. "Mr. Sterling, you are absolutely right. I was just discussing the acquisition," she said, her eyes locked on Julian's, challenging him to deny the ridiculous fantasy she was about to weave. "And I was just telling him that any business transaction concerning my fiancé's company must go through me first. We have a policy about taking kickbacks from rival firms." The word fiancé hung in the suddenly suffocating silence, a preposterous, beautiful, and utterly terrifying fabrication. Sterling's jaw dropped, and he looked from Alara to Julian, utter confusion warring with disbelief. Julian Varon, the man who was rumored to have ice water in his veins and had never been publicly linked to any woman for longer than a dinner reservation, was being claimed. Julian didn't blink. His expression remained utterly unreadable, a masterpiece of controlled indifference, but Alara could sense the internal calculation running behind his eyes. He paused, a long, agonizing beat of time passing. The entire fate of her future, perhaps her life, rested on his next movement, his next word. He could expose the lie, fire her, and leave her to the tender mercies of Sterling and Marcus. Or he could, for a reason she could not possibly fathom, accept the mantle she had thrust upon him. Slowly, Julian's lips curved into the barest suggestion of a smile, a cold, dangerous baring of teeth that did nothing to reassure Alara, but everything to solidify the lie for Sterling. He took a measured step closer to Alara, his hip brushing the side of the table, a possessive, territorial gesture that was devastatingly effective. He placed one large, heavy hand on the small of Alara's back, a gesture that immediately felt like a brand, a claim of ownership. The heat of his touch, even through the fabric of her blouse, was shocking and anchored her to the moment. He looked down at Sterling, and the cold fury in his voice, though quiet, resonated with the unmistakable weight of ultimate authority. "Mr. Sterling," Julian began, his voice a low, resonant baritone, "I was unaware that a simple courtesy call on a preliminary review had devolved into an attempt to bribe my future wife. This conversation is over. Get out." The dismissal was absolute, irreversible, and humiliating. Sterling, his face mottled with shock and rage, stammered a weak protest, but Julian's glare silenced him instantly. Within moments, the rival executive had gathered his things and stumbled out of the room, leaving the check and the crumpled paper lying uselessly on the table. Once the door had clicked shut, the silence returned, heavier and far more dangerous than before. Alara could feel the pressure of Julian's hand on her back, the silent question in his powerful presence. She had gambled everything on his willingness to play along, and now she had to pay the price for his intervention. Julian removed his hand and walked to the window overlooking the city, his back to her, and the absence of his touch felt like a sudden drop in altitude. "That," he said, his voice now entirely devoid of the mild amusement he had shown Sterling, "was a remarkably stupid thing to do, Lena Evans. I don't take kindly to being used as a shield, especially by someone I barely know, who is using a false name, and who has clearly just extricated herself from a compromising situation that had absolutely nothing to do with corporate espionage." Alara's carefully constructed composure shattered. She turned to face him, the fear giving way to a desperate, shaky honesty. "You're right, it was reckless. I'm sorry, Mr. Varon, I'll clear out my desk immediately. But I promise you I didn't compromise any Varon business. Sterling was just trying to leverage me into giving him information that would benefit his firm and—" She stopped, knowing a lie wouldn't work. "He knows people I was trying to avoid." Julian turned slowly, his eyes narrowing, assessing her for any sign of deception. "Marcus Thorne," he stated, not as a question but as a pronouncement. The sound of her ex-husband's name on his lips was a fresh, sickening blow. "Sterling is known to be a close associate of his. Thorne is a dangerous man, Alara, and I know your name is Lena Evans, so why are you here, and why am I your fiancé?" He was terrifyingly efficient. He had already found her real name, her connection to Thorne, and deduced the severity of her situation. Alara felt the last vestige of her independence slip away. She couldn't lie to him anymore. "My name is Alara Vance," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "I left Marcus 7 months ago. I lost everything, all my assets are frozen, and I had nowhere to go. I needed a job and a safe place. I chose Varon Global because it's vast and anonymous. Sterling recognized me, not as Alara, but as Marcus's wife. He was threatening me, using Marcus's influence to try and get me to cooperate. I lied about the engagement because I knew you were the only person in this building with enough power to stop Sterling in his tracks. You are the only person Marcus would not dare to cross." She looked at him, pleading without words. "I had a plan, a small amount of money, and I was going to disappear completely once I had secured my position here. I never meant to involve you." Julian's gaze hardened, but for the first time, Alara noticed a flicker of something beneath the cold control. Not sympathy, but a recognition of a necessary ruthlessness. He took another step toward her, closing the distance, and the sense of overwhelming power returned. "You chose wisely, Alara Vance," he murmured, the sound of her real name on his lips feeling both intimate and judgmental. "It is true, Marcus Thorne will not cross me, but now you have given me something to leverage. You have placed me in a situation where I have to choose between exposing you as a liar, thereby weakening my own position in the market by appearing volatile, or playing along with a charade that is inconvenient and entirely your making." He walked past her and stopped at the conference room bar, pouring a clear liquid into a heavy crystal glass. He didn't offer her one. "I don't do things for free," he continued, turning to face her, the glass held loosely in his hand. "You have bought my protection, Alara, and the price is not an apology. The price is your obedience, your absolute cooperation, and the total and complete surrender of your current life. The engagement is no longer a lie used to stop a bribe. It is a necessary fiction to keep Marcus Thorne and every other vulture like Sterling away from what is mine." Alara stared at him, stunned. He wasn't firing her, he was absorbing her. He was taking her desperate lie and cementing it into a dangerous reality, giving her the one thing she desperately needed, protection, but at a cost she hadn't fully comprehended. "What exactly does that mean?" she whispered. "Obedience, cooperation." Julian took a slow sip of the drink, his eyes never leaving hers. "It means you will resign from your analyst position immediately. You will move into my residence this evening. You will wear the ring I provide. You will attend every function. Every business dinner, every family gathering I dictate. You will learn the rules of my world, and you will not break them. In return, I will give you a safe haven that Marcus Thorne cannot penetrate. I will ensure your safety, your finances, and your freedom from him. You will not have to look over your shoulder again." The proposition was impossible, terrifying, and the most tempting offer she had ever received. Freedom from Marcus. A life without fear. But at the cost of her independence, surrendering herself entirely to another powerful, demanding man, one whose true intentions and full scope of power were shrouded in shadow and whispers. "You're asking me to become your captive," she breathed out, her hands tightening into fists. Julian smiled again, and this time there was no pretense of cold charm. It was the knowing smirk of a predator who had his prey cornered. "I'm asking you to become my necessary accessory, a political maneuver, and an effective shield. You will be very comfortable, Alara, and you will be very safe. The alternative is simple. Walk out of this room alone, return to your empty apartment, and wait for Marcus to find you. You know he will find you. You have 20 seconds to decide." The ultimatum hung in the air, weighted with her past trauma and his immense, dark power. Alara looked at the glass table, reflecting the city's grim light, then at the door, which symbolized an impossible escape and inevitable capture. Finally, she looked into the cold, unwavering gray eyes of Julian Varen. He was danger, but he was also a wall, and she had run out of ground to stand on. She had nothing left to lose but the fear that consumed her. She straightened her spine, a desperate resilience returning. She might be giving up her independence, but she was buying her life. "I accept, Mr. Varen," Alara said, the words a solemn vow. "I will be your fiancé, I will follow your rules, but I have one condition." Julian raised an eyebrow, a flicker of surprise in his expression, a silent question for her audacity. "My condition is that you ensure Marcus Thorne never comes near me again," Alara stated, meeting his gaze with renewed fire. "Not just while I'm with you, but forever. I need him gone from my life permanently. That is the price for my cooperation." Julian set the glass down with a heavy click, the sound echoing in the silence. He walked back to her, and the raw intensity of his focus was overwhelming. He stopped inches from her, forcing her to look up into his eyes. His voice dropped to a low, dangerous growl, a promise and a threat rolled into one. "Consider it done, Alara Vance," he said, the darkness in his eyes deepening. "Welcome to my world. Now come with me. We have an engagement ring to buy and a story to solidify." He didn't wait for her to move, simply took her arm, not gently, but with a firm, commanding grip, and steered her toward the door that led out of the conference room and into the labyrinth of his formidable empire. The lie had become a life sentence, and the walls of her gilded cage were now officially closing in. The opulence of Julian Varen's penthouse was a stark, almost blinding contrast to the quiet, nondescript apartment Alara had called home for the past 7 months. Located on the uppermost floors of the Varen Global Tower, it was a sprawling expanse of polished dark wood, minimalist Italian furniture, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a dizzying panorama of the city below. Every piece of art was a museum-quality abstract. Every surface gleamed with an almost aggressive perfection, and the silence that permeated the space was both luxurious and profoundly isolating. It felt less like a home and more like a carefully curated exhibit, a monument to unassailable power and solitary wealth. Julian led her through the grand foyer, past a towering, abstract bronze sculpture, and into a vast living area where a single, oversized sectional sofa faced a magnificent view. He didn't offer a tour, didn't make small talk. His movements were precise, efficient, and utterly devoid of anything superfluous. He gestured toward one of the guest rooms, a space larger and more lavish than her entire previous apartment, a veritable suite with its own marble bathroom and a closet that could swallow a boutique. "This will be your room," he stated, his voice flat, devoid of warmth or welcome. "Your belongings have already been moved. Anything you requested will be here by morning. A staff will be on call for anything you require. Your access to the building and all secure areas has been updated. You will be safe here. You will also be monitored. Do not mistake security for freedom." He then produced a small, velvet box from his inner jacket pocket. Inside, nestled against black satin, was a diamond ring that shimmered with an almost otherworldly brilliance. It was a single, flawless pear-shaped stone, flanked by delicate pavé diamonds, set in platinum. It was enormous, obscene in its grandeur, and instantly screamed unfathomable wealth. "Put it on," he commanded, his eyes fixed on her. "It needs to be seen. You will not take it off, not for a moment, unless I instruct you to do so. Alara's fingers trembled slightly as she took the ring. The weight of it was substantial, a physical representation of the gilded cage she had now willingly stepped into. She slid it onto her left ring finger. It fit perfectly, a symbol of a lie that was now her truth. It felt cold against her skin, heavy with the silent promises and unstated demands that Julian Varen represented. "Dinner is at 8, he continued, his gaze briefly sweeping over the ring, a ghost of satisfaction in his expression. "Be punctual. We will be discussing the specifics of our engagement. Dress appropriately. I have arranged for a wardrobe. Consider it part of your new role." With that, he turned and disappeared down a long hallway, leaving Alara alone in the overwhelming silence of her luxurious prison. The next few days blurred into a surreal existence. Alara tried to establish some semblance of routine, but every aspect of her life was now dictated by Julian's unseen hand. A team of stylists arrived, transforming her modest wardrobe into an array of designer gowns, exquisite business attire, and casual wear that cost more than her former car. Her hair was restyled, her makeup expertly applied, until the reflection in the mirror was almost unrecognizable. A polished, sophisticated woman who looked every inch the fiancée of a powerful CEO, but whose eyes still held a lingering shadow of fear and a fierce, unspoken defiance. Dinners with Julian were formal, silent affairs in the cavernous dining room. He was a man of few words outside of business, and their conversations were strictly transactional, revolving around the details of their public charade. He meticulously outlined the narrative they would present, a whirlwind, intensely private romance culminating in a secret proposal. He instructed her on the key figures in his social and business circles, their allegiances, their vulnerabilities. He tested her knowledge, her memory, her ability to maintain the elaborate fiction. His dominance was absolute, his expectations exacting. She was to be an extension of his will, a beautiful, intelligent ornament, and a loyal partner in deception. Despite the constant surveillance, his security team, though unobtrusive, was omnipresent, and the strictures placed upon her, Alara found herself growing accustomed to the strange rhythm of her new life. The terror of Marcus finding her began to recede, replaced by a different kind of fear, a primal awareness of Julian's power. But with that fear, subtly, insidiously, a new emotion began to bloom, a reluctant fascination. Julian Varen was undeniably a force of nature. His mind was a steel trap, his decisions swift and unforgiving. Watching him navigate the complex world of high finance, or field calls that hinted at operations far more shadowy than mere corporate acquisitions, was like observing a dangerous, highly intelligent predator in its natural habitat. He moved with an innate authority, a quiet confidence that demanded respect, and Alara, despite herself, found herself respecting it. His focus was absolute, his control unwavering. He seemed to embody the very essence of power, and for a woman who had spent years feeling powerless, there was a strange, undeniable allure to it. One evening, a week after her arrival, Julian summoned her to his private study. It was a vast room, lined with dark, leather-bound books and dominated by a massive desk of gleaming black granite. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and expensive whiskey. He sat behind the desk, bathed in the soft glow of a desk lamp, a half-empty glass in his hand. He gestured to the leather chair opposite him. "Sit, Alara," he commanded, his voice softer than usual, a subtle shift that made her instinctively wary. "We need to discuss your role beyond mere public appearances. I require your intellect, not just your presence." He pushed a stack of files across the desk. They contained meticulously researched profiles of key figures in the art world, gallerists, collectors, auction house owners, even a few art dealers with less than reputable connections. Is legitimate. My organization has, let's say, a tangential interest in high-value art acquisitions. Some pieces are for legitimate investment, others are sensitive assets. I need someone with your knowledge to vet these acquisitions, to identify fakes, to assess true value, and more importantly, to understand the networks involved. He leaned forward, his elbows on the desk, his gaze intense. "I am not asking you to return to your old profession. I am asking you to apply your skills for my benefit within my control. This will be your real work here. It will give you purpose, Alara, and it will make you invaluable." Alara felt a spark ignite within her, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. Purpose. The idea of using her intellect, her passion, even in this dark, controlled environment, was a temptation she hadn't anticipated. It was a small concession, a carefully calculated offering from Julian, but it was enough to make her see past the gilded bars of her cage, if only for a moment. "What kind of sensitive assets are we talking about, Julian?" she asked, the directness surprising even herself. The question hung in the air, a challenge to his carefully maintained opacity. His eyes narrowed, a subtle tightening around his mouth. "Assets that require discretion, assets that cannot be easily traced, assets that, if found in the wrong hands, could cause considerable trouble for the wrong people. Your job is not to ask why we acquire them, but to ensure what we acquire is genuine and serves its purpose. Do you understand the distinction?" She did. He was drawing a clear boundary. Her role was technical, not moral. She was to be a tool, a valuable one, but a tool nonetheless. And yet, the temptation of regaining a part of herself, even under his shadow, was powerful. "I understand," she said slowly, picking up a file, her fingers tracing the names of famous galleries. "And if I find something questionable, you report it to me and only to me," he stated, his voice absolute. "Your loyalty, Alara, is to me. Your silence is paramount. Your discretion is expected. These are the foundations of our arrangement. Break them, and you will find that Marcus Thorne will be the least of your concerns." The implicit threat was chilling, a reminder of the true nature of the man who now held her life in his hands. He was offering her a carefully constructed freedom within his control, a subtle seduction that appealed to her intellect and her desperate need for security, but it came with an unyielding demand for absolute fealty. As the weeks passed, their evenings sometimes extended beyond transactional discussions. After particularly long days of her working through the art files and him conducting his shadowy business, Julian would occasionally join her in the living room, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, and simply sit. The silence between them would shift, becoming less formal, more charged. He would watch her, his gaze intense, assessing, and sometimes she would catch a flicker of something she couldn't quite decipher. Curiosity, perhaps, or a hint of a deeper, unspoken emotion. One night, a storm raged outside, rattling the panoramic windows of the penthouse. Alara sat on the floor by the window, wrapped in a blanket, watching the lightning crackle across the city skyline. Julian entered, his footsteps barely audible on the polished floor, and poured himself a drink. Instead of going to his study, he walked to the window and stood beside her, a silent, imposing presence. "You're not afraid of storms," he observed, his voice a low rumble above the sound of the rain. "No," she replied, her voice soft. "I find them powerful, cleansing, like the world is letting out a scream it can't hold in anymore." He was silent for a long moment, then, surprisingly, he chuckled, a low, guttural sound that was rare and unexpected. "A scream the world can't hold in, an interesting perspective." He took a sip of his drink. "You have a unique way of looking at things, Alara, not what I expected when I saw you cowering from Sterling." "Cowering was a means to an end," she retorted, a flash of her old fire returning. "A well-placed lie often is." He turned, leaning against the window frame, his eyes fixed on her. "Indeed, and you chose me as your lie. Why not another executive? Why me?" Alara looked up at him, the storm light illuminating his hard, aristocratic features. "Because you radiate power, Julian. Not just corporate power, but something deeper, something unshakable. Everyone in this building, everyone in this city, knows not to cross Julian Varen. I needed an absolute wall, not just a temporary shield." His gaze intensified, and for a moment the cold facade seemed to crack, revealing a sliver of the man beneath, a man who understood the weight of that kind of power and perhaps the loneliness it brought. He didn't deny it. He simply held her gaze, and in the unspoken language between them, a new understanding began to form. "You understand, then," he said, his voice quiet, "that walls can also be cages. And cages can also be protection," she countered, holding his gaze. It depends on what you're trying to keep out. He took another slow sip of his drink, his eyes unblinking. The air between them hummed with an unspoken tension, a dangerous dance of intellect and nascent attraction. The temptation wasn't just the security he offered, nor the purpose he provided. It was him. The formidable, enigmatic man who controlled her life, who saw through her lies, and yet chose to keep her. His quiet strength, his ruthless efficiency, and the unexpected glimpses of a mind far more complex than she had initially imagined were weaving a subtle spell around her. He finished his drink, the clink of ice against glass breaking the spell. "Get some rest, Alara," he said, his voice returning to its customary detachment. "We have a charity gala tomorrow night. You'll need to be charming, poised, and utterly convincing as my fiancé. The city will be watching." He turned and walked away, leaving her once more to the vast silence and the burgeoning, complicated feelings he evoked within her. The gala was a glittering affair, a spectacle of wealth and influence held in the city's grandest ballroom. Alara, dressed in a midnight blue gown that shimmered like liquid starlight, felt a strange mixture of exhilaration and unease. Julian, impeccably handsome in a bespoke tuxedo, kept her close, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back as they navigated the throng of movers and shakers. He introduced her as his fiancée with a quiet pride that was almost convincing, his eyes never leaving hers, a silent reminder of their elaborate charade. She played her part flawlessly, smiling, engaging in polite conversation, radiating the confidence of a woman deeply loved and utterly secure. But beneath the polished veneer, her senses were heightened, constantly scanning the crowd, always vigilant. She noticed the subtle shifts in Julian's demeanor, the way his eyes would track certain individuals, the coded exchanges he had with his inner circle. She was learning his world, absorbing its dangers and its unspoken rules. As the night wore on, a feeling of dizzying unreality began to settle over her. She was living a lie, yet the protection it afforded felt more real than anything she had experienced in years. The way Julian held her, the way he subtly steered her through conversations, the way he silenced a lingering gaze from a predatory businessman with a single, cold look. It was all part of the act, but it felt incredibly real. His dominance was absolute, his control undeniable, and the safety it offered was intoxicating. Then across the crowded ballroom, amidst the laughter and the glittering chandeliers, she saw him, Marcus Thorne. He stood by a marble pillar, his handsome face contorted with a familiar rage, his eyes, dark and predatory, fixed on her. The world seemed to tilt, the music fading into a distant hum. The air grew cold, and the phantom chains on her wrists felt agonizingly real again. Julian, ever vigilant, felt her stiffen beside him. He followed her gaze, and his jaw tightened. His grip on her back became a steel vice, a silent promise of protection. He looked at Marcus, and his eyes, usually cold, now blazed with a fierce, possessive fury that was utterly terrifying. The tension in the room, which had been simmering beneath the surface, began to coalesce around them. "He's here," Alara whispered, her voice barely audible, the old terror seizing her throat. "Julian, he found me." Julian said nothing, his gaze locked on Marcus, a silent challenge passing between the two men. He pulled Alara closer, positioning her slightly behind him, his body a solid, unyielding barrier. The music faltered, the whispers around them began to die down, replaced by an uneasy silence. Marcus, driven by a possessive rage that clearly overshadowed any fear of Julian, took a step forward, his eyes burning with accusation. Julian stood his ground, a towering, unshakable presence. He met Marcus's furious gaze head-on, his expression a mask of cold, lethal warning. The protection he had promised was about to be tested, and Alara knew, with a certainty that both terrified and thrilled her, that he would not yield. The cage he had built around her might be gilded, but it was also forged from steel, and now he was prepared to defend it and her from the demons of her past. The cavernous ballroom, moments ago a symphony of polite chatter and clinking crystal, had devolved into a silent, frozen tableau centered around three figures. Marcus Thorne, his face mottled with a possessive fury that Alara knew all too well, had closed the distance, stopping mere feet from where Julian Varen stood, a monumental barrier of calm, lethal intent. The other guests, high society sharks and corporate rivals alike, were now clustered together, whispering behind hands, watching the unfolding confrontation with avid, morbid curiosity. They understood this wasn't just a society squabble. This was a clash of titans, a test of dominance that would reverberate across the city. Julian did not move, did not twitch, but the sheer force of his controlled anger was palpable, vibrating in the space between the men. Elara was shielded behind him, his arm a rigid steel band across her lower back, her anchor against the tidal wave of panic Marcus's presence always unleashed. She could feel Julian's heartbeat, steady and slow, a drumbeat of absolute resolve against her trembling ribs. Marcus spoke first, his voice a low, dangerous snarl aimed only at Elara. "You think a flashy ring and a powerful arm are enough, Elara? You're still mine. You signed the agreements. You walked away from everything, but you don't get to erase me." He took a step to the side, trying to flank Julian and get a clear look at her face. Julian shifted instantly, blocking the path, ensuring Marcus saw only his tailored back and the breadth of his shoulder. The cold fury in Julian's gray eyes was now fully exposed. He finally spoke, his voice low, resonant, and so utterly devoid of mercy that it silenced the last, nervous whispers in the room. "You'll never touch her again," Julian stated, the words cutting through the tension like shards of glass. It wasn't a warning, it was a decree. "She is under my protection. Any contract, agreement, or claim you believe you hold is now null and void. You approach her, you speak to her, or you send your dogs after her again, and you will find your entire infrastructure compromised. Do you understand the meaning of utter ruin, Thorn? Because I promise you I am its architect." Marcus flinched, not from fear of physical violence, though Julian radiated the capability, but from the clear, unmistakable weight of the threat. Marcus was a powerful man, a bully who relied on legal leverage and financial intimidation, but Julian's power operated outside those boundaries. Julian spoke with the authority of someone who controlled not just the markets, but the darker currents that ran beneath them. "You don't know what you're getting involved in, Varen," Marcus spat, trying to regain the upper hand through bluster. "She's nothing but a liar, a traitor. She ran because she couldn't handle the truth of my world." "The only truth I care about is the one standing behind me," Julian countered, his voice sharp as a blade. He maintained eye contact with Marcus, a brutal lesson in dominance. "And what she is mine. She is under the protection of the Varen name. Consider this your final and only warning. Leave this room, leave this city, and cease to pursue her. The alternative is a swift and permanent end to every ambition you hold dear." The message was unambiguous. This was not a dispute over a woman. This was a war over territory, and Julian Varen had staked his claim. Defeated, seeing the unyielding resolve in Julian's gaze and sensing the dangerous whispers already swirling around the room, Marcus finally cracked. With a final, venomous glare directed over Julian's shoulder at Elara, he turned and stalked out of the ballroom, his retreat a humiliation observed by the entire city's elite. Julian didn't relax until the heavy doors had swung shut behind Marcus. The immediate threat was gone, but the reverberations lingered. The guests began to murmur again, a loud wave of speculation washing over them. Julian turned, his hands immediately cupping Elara's shoulders, his thumbs rubbing firm, grounding circles into her skin. "Breathe, Elara," he commanded, his eyes searching hers, a rare, momentary glimpse of concern overriding his cold professionalism. Elara's legs felt like water, the adrenaline crash leaving her weak. "He found me." "He still knows where I am," she whispered, the old terror clinging to her. "He knows where you are, but he also now knows who is keeping you," Julian said, his voice hardening with renewed resolve. "My warning was not hollow. He will be occupied with more pressing matters soon, matters designed to occupy him permanently. But for tonight, we leave." He whisked her out of the ballroom with a speed and efficiency that allowed no room for further questions or gawking. They were taken swiftly back to the Varen penthouse, the silence of the car ride thick with the aftermath of the confrontation. Once back in the secure confines of the living room, Elara finally collapsed onto the sofa, the full weight of the trauma hitting her. The years of fear, the public humiliation, the sheer terror of seeing Marcus again, It all flooded out in a wave of shaking, silent sobs. Julian watched her from across the room, not moving, not offering platitudes. He simply watched, his expression unreadable, until the sobs subsided into heavy, shuddering breaths. Then, he walked to the bar, poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into a glass, and brought it to her. He didn't hand it over. He waited until she reached for it, forcing her to stabilize. "You survived him, Alara," Julian stated, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of certainty. "He holds no power here. That fear you carry, it's a ghost of the man he was to you, not the threat he is to me." "You don't understand, Julian," she managed, clutching the glass. "His cruelty wasn't just physical or financial. It was methodical. He broke me down until I believed I deserved it, until I believed I was nothing without him." Julian sat on the coffee table opposite her, leaning forward, his gray eyes pinning her in place. "Then you are wrong. He never broke you. He simply locked away the person you are, the one who chose to lie to the most powerful man in the city to save herself. That is not nothing. That is calculation. That is courage." He spoke with an intensity that demanded belief. He didn't offer pity. He offered validation of her strength. It was a different kind of support than she had ever known, a ruthless loyalty that resonated with her own need for survival. "But what did it cost you, Julian?" she asked, looking at the man who had just risked a high-profile business confrontation for her sake. "That threat to Marcus, it was more than just corporate talk, wasn't it? Who are you really outside of the CEO facade?" Julian hesitated, a long, profound pause that made the silence of the penthouse deafening. He reached up, running a hand over the left side of his jaw and neck. It was a small, reflexive gesture, but her eyes, trained by years of observation in the art world, saw the subtle, faint line of an old, crescent-shaped scar tucked just beneath his ear, fatting into his hairline. It was barely visible, but the movement had drawn her attention to it. It was a scar that hinted at violence, not a boardroom accident. He didn't try to hide it once she had seen it. His hand dropped, and his gaze was steady, dark with a deep, private memory. "Varon Global Holdings is the clean face, the legitimate cover," he admitted, his voice dropping low, sharing a secret that felt heavier than any corporate crime. "The Varon family legacy is older, deeper, and far less ethical. We built this empire on control, on loyalty, on absolute authority, and yes, on violence. My father made sure I understood that a velvet glove is useless without the iron fist inside it." He tapped the faint scar with a single, precise finger. This is a reminder. A lesson I earned at 18, when I thought I knew better than my father, when I thought I could run a legitimate business without the necessary teeth." He looked away, his gaze settling on the glittering city lights, a man consumed by the weight of his legacy. "I allowed a rival faction to get too comfortable to think I was weak. They sent a message. It was intended to be fatal. It was a mistake I never repeated. I spent 5 years systematically dismantling every aspect of their operation until there was nothing left but dust. That," he said, turning back to Alara, his eyes cold and hard again, "is who I am. I don't just manage companies. I manage power. I maintain order. And I protect what is mine with whatever means are necessary." Alara felt the magnitude of his confession sink in. He wasn't just a CEO. He was the head of a powerful, shadowy organization, one with a history of ruthlessness and an unwritten code of loyalty and punishment. Her initial lie had tied her to a man of unimaginable wealth and influence, but now she understood the true scope of the danger and the depth of the commitment her lie demanded. He wasn't just protecting her. He was declaring her territory, and in his world, territory was defended absolutely. "You didn't have to tell me that," she whispered, shaken by the intimacy of the revelation. "Yes, I did," Julian countered, a flicker of something like respect in his eyes. "You are the public face of my commitment. You need to know the landscape. You need to know that the threat I made to Marcus was genuine. He will learn quickly that crossing me is suicide, and you need to understand the consequences of betrayal. Loyalty is absolute in my world, Alara, and now you are in my world." He rose, walking to the large window, presenting his formidable silhouette against the backdrop of the city. "My father died 5 years ago. I inherited everything, the businesses, the legitimate holdings, and the other assets. I have spent the last 5 years legitimizing, strengthening, and streamlining the empire. I have bled for it. I have sacrificed any semblance of a normal life for it. It is my purpose, my duty. And I will allow nothing to compromise it, not even a sudden, fake engagement. He turned back, and the air between them crackled with a new, raw energy. He had shown her his deepest wound, the scar on his neck, the scar on his soul, the cost of the power he wielded. And in that shared darkness, the line between the charade and reality began to blur. His intensity, his raw honesty about his history of violence was not repellent, it was compelling. She was drawn to the strength that arose from his wounds, the absolute conviction of his command. He was damaged, yes, but he was also the single strongest defense against the damage that Marcus had inflicted. Elara stood up and walked toward him, driven by a force she couldn't name. Perhaps it was simply the need to be close to the only person who could truly protect her, or perhaps it was the burgeoning, undeniable spark of attraction to the dangerous man who saw her fear and offered her steel in return. She stopped a foot away from him, close enough to feel the heat radiating off his body, close enough to see the exhaustion and the relentless control etched around his eyes. "You took a massive risk tonight, Julian," she said. Her voice soft but firm. "You compromised your own privacy to protect me. Why? Why go to such lengths for a lie?" Julian looked down at her, the distance between them suddenly agonizingly small. His gaze dropped to her mouth, lingered, and then returned to her eyes. The cold professionalism was entirely gone, replaced by a dangerous, palpable hunger. "Because," he murmured, his voice husky, "Marcus Thorne's cruelty is familiar. I know what he is. I hate that specific kind of weakness, the weakness that preys on those who are vulnerable, and I don't tolerate threats to what is mine. You placed yourself under my care, Elara. You gave me your lie, and I have chosen to turn it into an absolute truth. I don't walk away from my commitments, ever." He raised a hand, his touch impossibly light, and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, his thumb lingering on her jawline, just a mirror of where his own scar lay. "You are mine now. My challenge, my shield, and now my focus. I find your intelligence compelling, your spirit tenacious, and your vulnerability intriguing. I want you to trust the protection I offer, Elara, not because you fear me, but because you fear the alternative." The air thinned around them, the silence amplifying the desperate, forbidden desire that had been simmering beneath the surface of their tense interactions. The temptation of Julian's power, his darkness, and his unwavering loyalty became overwhelming. Elara leaned into his touch, a silent acknowledgement of her surrender, not to his dominance, but to the promise of security that only he could provide. The physical distance between them had become untenable, a forced resistance to a current that was pulling them both under. Julian saw the answer in her eyes in the slight tilt of her head. He didn't need words. With a low, rough exhale, he closed the final inch, his mouth claiming hers in a kiss that was not tentative or sweet, but demanding, authoritative, and utterly consumed by the tension that had been building between them. It was a kiss that sealed the bargain, that confirmed the price, and that utterly dissolved the line between the protective CEO and the possessive mafia boss. The charade was over. The romance, dangerous and consuming, had begun. The kiss was a cataclysm, a rupture in the carefully maintained order of their existence. It was a language of dominance and desperation, an acknowledgement of the forbidden current that had been running beneath their professional arrangement. Julian's mouth was firm, demanding, seeking not a tender connection but a fierce confirmation of possession. Elara responded with an equal, frightening intensity, years of suppressed fear and loneliness pouring out into the contact. This wasn't the tentative embrace of new romance. It was the ferocious sealing of a pact made in the shadow of danger. When Julian finally pulled back, his breath was ragged, his eyes dark with a mixture of hunger and self-reproach. He still held her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing the line of her jaw, a silent claim. "That," he stated, his voice a low, rough command, "changes the arrangement entirely, Elara. There is no going back to the lie. What we have is now real. You are mine, and I protect what is mine with finality." Elara didn't argue. She leaned into the solid warmth of his body, the fear of Marcus temporarily eclipsed by the sheer, imposing presence of Julian. She was trading one cage for another, yes, but this one offered security, purpose, and a terrifying, consuming passion. "I know," she whispered, her voice husky. "I choose this, I choose you, but I need to know what the price is, Julian. Beyond my freedom, beyond my independence, what do you require of me in return for your absolute protection?" Julian stepped back, regaining the distance needed for professional control, but the intensity in his eyes remained. He walked back to his desk, poured 2 glasses of whiskey this time, and handed one to Alara, an acknowledgement of her newfound status as an equal, albeit a subordinate equal, in his dangerous world. "The price is everything," he answered, his gaze unyielding. "I require your absolute trust and your total acceptance of my life. You saw tonight what my world demands. It is not polite society. The Varen legacy is built on the willingness to operate outside the law when necessary, to ensure control is maintained. You will stand by my side, publicly and privately, and you will ask no questions about the things you do not need to know. You will accept that your security will always come at the cost of your privacy and the possibility of risk." He paused, watching her reaction intently, searching for any flicker of hesitation. "More importantly, I need you to understand that by committing to me, you commit yourself to the very real possibility of danger. My enemies, the ones who truly understand the power I hold, will see you as a vulnerability. They will target you. They will attempt to use you to reach me. I am a wall against Marcus, but in becoming my true partner, you become a target for others. You will always be guarded. You will always be watched. That is the price of a life with Julian Varen." Alara took a deep breath, the smooth heat of the whiskey burning in her throat. The cold, stark honesty was a brutal testament to his respect. He wasn't obscuring the cost. He was laying out the contract in blood. "And the promise?" she asked, meeting his gaze across the granite desk. "What is the promise I receive in return for this absolute surrender?" Julian's features softened almost imperceptibly, a change only she seemed able to detect. He walked around the desk, stopping in front of her, closing the space with his sheer physical presence. He didn't touch her, but the air around them pulsed with his resolve. "The promise is simple and irreversible," he vowed, his voice low and solemn, holding the weight of his entire empire. "I promise you absolute, unwavering loyalty. I promise you a security that no one, not Marcus, not any rival, will ever breach. I will build an impenetrable sanctuary around you. I will give you a purpose that utilizes your intelligence and passion. And I promise you that I will never lie to you about who I am or what I do. You are not a temporary convenience, Alara. You are a cornerstone. I will protect you with my life, and I will protect your future with the full force of my organization." The weight of his commitment was staggering. He was offering her not just a life, but a kingdom, dangerous and magnificent, built on the foundations of loyalty and ultimate power. "I accept the price," Alara said, setting her glass down, her gaze locked with his. "And I hold you to your promise. I will not betray you, Julian. I will stand by you." The commitment deepened their connection instantly, pulling them into a vortex of shared secrets and intense intimacy. The charade was over. Their bond was sealed. They spent the next weeks in a furious, consuming rush of work and profound private connection. Alara threw herself into the art acquisition research, uncovering intricate networks of money laundering and illegal artifact trading that fed into Julian's legitimate business. She proved her worth, not just as a beautiful accessory, but as a brilliant, resourceful partner who understood the complex, moral gray areas of his enterprise. Julian, in turn, opened more of his private world to her. He introduced her to his inner circle, silent, fiercely loyal men like Elias, his head of security, who moved with a quiet efficiency that spoke of years spent navigating dangerous paths. Julian began to rely on Alara's judgment, consulting her not just on the art side, but on political and social maneuvers, appreciating her sharp, analytical mind and her ability to read subtle cues in social situations. The distinction between the CEO and the boss began to blur. In the quiet solitude of his study, Julian was the partner who valued her intellect. But when a rival dared to cross him, the ruthless, formidable boss emerged, cold and utterly unforgiving. But the price of their commitment was rapidly becoming clear. One frosty morning, As Alara was preparing to leave the penthouse for a meeting at a private gallery, part of her new, legitimate role vetting a collection, Elias intercepted her. "Ms. Vance," Elias said, his voice flat, his face impassive. "A package was delivered to the main office for you this morning. It was intercepted by security protocols. Mr. Varon asked me to deliver the contents and the analysis personally." He presented her with a sealed, clear plastic evidence bag containing a small porcelain ballerina figurine, a gift Marcus had given her on their first anniversary, a piece she thought she had left behind. Her breath hitched, the sight of the familiar object sending a cold wave of dread through her. "The package contained more than the figurine," Elias continued, his eyes unwavering. "It contained a miniature GPS tracker, active and state-of-the-art, embedded in the base of the porcelain. It was addressed using your old name, Alara Thorne, a clear message that Marcus is testing the barrier." Alara felt the blood drain from her face. Marcus wasn't just retreating after the gala, he was escalating. He was using surveillance, a subtle psychological attack designed to remind her that he could still reach her. "But there's more," Elias added, his voice dropping slightly. "The surveillance equipment wasn't just professional grade. The specific frequency and encryption key used are proprietary. They match the known assets of the Petrov Syndicate." Alara looked up, bewildered. The Petrov Syndicate, Julian's rivals, why would Marcus be working with them? "He isn't," Julian's voice cut in from the doorway. He stood there, dressed in a black turtleneck and slacks, looking less like a CEO and more like the dangerous head of an operation, his gaze dark with lethal calculation. "The Syndicate doesn't care about Marcus or your divorce, Alara. They saw the public confrontation at the gala. They saw me commit myself to your defense against a prominent figure. They read the commitment, and they immediately identified you as my weakness, my new vulnerability." He walked toward them, his movements coiled and deliberate. "They didn't just send a message to you, they sent one to me. They are testing the boundaries of my protection. They are asking if I will risk the entirety of my operation to protect a woman. They were using Marcus's lingering obsession as cover to place a direct threat on my own territory." Julian looked at the porcelain figurine, a look of profound disgust crossing his features. "This is the price, Alara. This is the reality. Your independence is gone. Your peace is gone. You are now a piece on a very large, very dangerous board. They are closing in, waiting for a chance to strike at me through you." The revelation was a punch to the gut. Alara realized that while Julian had neutralized the individual threat of Marcus, he had inadvertently elevated her to the attention of far greater, more ruthless enemies, enemies who played for stakes that involved empires, not just marriages. "What do we do?" she asked, not with panic, but with a fierce resolve. The fear was still there, but now it was channeled into an overwhelming need to fight back, to protect not just herself, but the man who had laid his own vulnerability bare for her. Julian looked at her, his eyes hardening with cold, absolute certainty. "We eliminate the threat, permanently. And we do it by making a public statement that is so definitive, so absolute, that no other rival faction ever dares to question your status again." He dismissed Elias with a nod and turned his full attention to Alara. He reached out and placed his hands firmly on her shoulders, the touch a blend of possessiveness and promise. "We accelerate everything, Alara. We solidify the public relationship and, more importantly, the private reality. I have to be able to trust you implicitly, and I need you to trust my solution. I am arranging a meeting with my inner council, the real council, the family elders. You will attend. You will be introduced, not as my fiancée, but as my chosen partner, the woman who will stand by me as I run this empire. You must show them strength, intelligence, and absolute loyalty. This is a crucial test. Pass this and you are untouchable." He leaned down, his voice dropping to a low, powerful murmur. "I offer you my name, my life, and my organization's unwavering shield, but you must be ready to walk into the fire with me. The enemies are closing in, Alara. Are you ready to pay the price?" Alara looked at the porcelain figurine, then into the steely gray depths of Julian's eyes. She saw the danger, the ruthlessness, and the profound, demanding love he was offering. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was choosing to reign. "I am ready, Julian," she affirmed, her voice clear and steady. "Show me the fire, I will stand in it with you." Julian's mouth curved into a slow, satisfied, utterly predatory smile. He brought her to him and kissed her, a deep, confirming kiss that carried the promise of their shared destiny, a life of unparalleled power and perpetual, exquisite danger. The meeting with the Varen Council was held 3 days later in a remote, heavily fortified villa tucked away in the sprawling hills north of the city. This was the true seat of Julian's power, a place where the CEO facade dissolved entirely, and the structure of the Famiglia was laid bare. The room was somber, lined with dark portraits of Varen ancestors, and the atmosphere was one of palpable, assessing silence. The council, 3 older, stern-faced men and 1 formidable, impeccably dressed woman, represented the long history and the sharp teeth of the Varen Empire. Alara entered on Julian's arm, dressed in a sleek, powerful black suit, her pear-shaped diamond ring catching the faint light. She walked not as a timid partner or a reluctant hostage, but with the composed confidence of a woman who knew her worth and accepted the risk. She was there to prove that she was an asset, not a liability, a cornerstone, not a crack in Julian's foundation. Julian introduced her, his voice commanding and devoid of compromise. "This is Alara Vance. She will stand with me. She is not a passing companion. She is my life partner and my analyst for all sensitive acquisitions. Her loyalty is absolute, and her commitment to the Varen future is the same as mine. Any threat against her is a direct attack on my authority. I expect your respect and your compliance." The senior woman, a sharp-eyed matriarch named Vittoria, studied Alara with unnerving intensity, her expression unreadable. "A woman of quick courage, if the rumors are true. But courage is not discretion, Julian. She brings a history of public weakness and domestic strife. She is a recognized vulnerability. How does she earn the protection that has been violently bought by generations of loyalty?" Alara spoke before Julian could intervene, her voice clear and ringing with conviction. "By understanding the value of this empire, Vittoria, and by eliminating the threats to it." She looked directly at Julian's face, then back to the matriarch. "Marcus Thorne is not a problem for the Varen organization. He is an irritant. But the Petrov Syndicate is leveraging his petty obsession to test Julian's resolve and expose the private lines of his operation. I have the expertise to verify the security and provenance of the acquisitions that fund their operations. I can expose their true assets, and I can identify the points of leverage. I bring Julian a weapon against his real rivals, not just a liability against his ex-husband." Her intelligence and audacity momentarily stunned the room into silence. She had correctly identified the true nature of the threat, and more critically, offered a solution that strengthened Julian's position within the organization. Vittoria's lips curved into the barest suggestion of a smile. "A weapon, indeed, but a weapon must be controlled, Alara Vance. Can we trust that you will not turn that intelligence against us?" "You can trust Julian Varen," Alara countered, placing her hand firmly on Julian's arm, a physical declaration of her commitment. "He has my loyalty and my silence. My life is safer with his organization strong. Betraying him would be betraying the only sanctuary I have ever found." Julian squeezed her hand, a powerful, possessive gesture that publicly cemented their alliance. He knew then, beyond any doubt, that her love was intertwined with the ruthless logic of his world. The confrontation with the council was won. They accepted her, not as a romantic interest, but as Julian's chosen strategic partner, a shield of beauty and a weapon of intellect. The reckoning with the Petrov Syndicate, however, was swift and unforgiving. Julian, armed with Alara's meticulous research into their shell companies and art assets, moved with the devastating precision of a man who had been waiting for the provocation. Using the information Alara provided, he didn't just target their external operations. He struck at the heart of their financial structure, simultaneously crippling their bank access and exposing their illicit art holdings to the international authorities. It was a perfectly executed maneuver that utilized both his legal and his illegal powers, dissolving the syndicate's power base almost overnight. During the fallout, Marcus Thorne, still attempting to use his limited influence to navigate the chaos, found himself entirely exposed. Julian had made good on his promise. He didn't harm Marcus directly. He simply allowed the crumbling infrastructure of the Petrov Syndicate to swallow the man whole. Marcus, now utterly ruined, stripped of his power, money, and influence, was left completely isolated, a nonentity in a world where power was the only currency. Illyra was finally, completely free of the ghost of her past. In the aftermath, the penthouse was quiet, the storm of violence and high-stakes maneuvering having passed. Illyra stood by the panoramic window of the study, watching the city lights, the symbol of the empire she had helped secure. Julian stood behind her, his arms wrapped around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. The intimacy they shared was now profound, forged in the crucible of danger and loyalty. "It's done," Julian murmured, the sound of his voice close to her ear, rich with satisfaction. "Marcus is nothing. The Petrovs are neutralized. You are safe, Illyra. We are secure." "And what now, Julian?" she asked, turning in his embrace to face him. "The promise of safety is kept, but the price of constant fear, I won't live waiting for the next attack. I committed to your world, but it has to be a world we can both survive in, Julian. Permanently." Julian looked at her, his gray eyes reflecting the depth of his devotion and the weight of his legacy. He saw not the frightened woman he had first encountered, but the fierce, intelligent partner who had risked everything for him. "My father believed that power had to be absolute, and that required absolute darkness," Julian admitted, running a thumb softly across her cheek. "I believed it too, until you forced me to confront the cost. You brought a necessary light into the hidden corners of my empire. You showed me a way to be strong without being recklessly vulnerable." He led her to his desk, where a series of complex legal documents lay neatly stacked. "I made a choice, Illyra. I am not leaving the Varen legacy, but I am reshaping it. We have spent months leveraging Varen Global Holdings to absorb the illicit operations, not to legitimize them, but to isolate them. The non-traditional assets, the darker currents, they are being restructured, placed under layers of impenetrable corporate firewalls. They will remain family business, yes, but they will not be the primary target of corporate warfare. I am consolidating the legitimate empire to be so vast, so powerful, that the hidden aspects become irrelevant to our rivals." He smiled, a genuine, warm smile that transformed his harsh features. "I will not leave the darkness, Illyra, but I will not drag you into the abyss. I will be the absolute protector you need, but I will also be the legal, legitimate CEO of a global powerhouse. You will run the Varen acquisitions and legacy wing, entirely within the legitimate structures. You will use your intellect, your passion, and your formidable insight to build a dynasty with me. I offer you a partnership that is equal in power, bound by love, and secured by the unwavering protection of the Varen name." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, unassuming black box. Opening it, he presented her with a platinum band, simple, elegant, and heavy with meaning. He took the massive, showy engagement ring off her finger and replaced it with the band, slipping it next to the pear-shaped diamond. "The first ring was the price of a lie and the promise of protection," he murmured, holding her hand firmly. "This is the truth of our future. It's a plain, honest ring, Illyra. It is the cost of my true commitment. I have fought for you, killed for you, and now I will build a dynasty with you. I love you, Illyra Vance, now and always." Tears, not of fear, but of profound relief and fierce love, welled in her eyes. She looked at the two rings on her finger, the glittering symbol of their dangerous, powerful world, and the simple band of their honest commitment. The romance had been earned, carved out of trauma and danger, and cemented by mutual loyalty. "I love you too, Julian Varen," she whispered, rising on her toes to kiss him, a soft, final vow. "I choose the power, the price, and the promise. I choose our future." They stood together by the window, united against the vast, glittering city. The air was clear, the danger neutralized, and their bond absolute. The CEO boss and the fierce woman who found sanctuary in his shadow were no longer playing a role. They were building an empire, side by side, their love a secret, potent force in a world defined by power.